Now we turn to an important, difficult challenge right now, confronting death, grief, and mourning. This is a sad topic, but it's not only sad, it's necessary. Because avoiding the reality and impact of America's growing death toll right now wouldn't honor the people we've lost, nor advance healing, nor the unity we need. So as America faces this death toll, which literally rivals entire wars we've fought put together, we want to turn with you right now to some lessons from history, how past presidents have confronted national tragedies and led our nation not only on the tangible part, issuing a policy response, paying for remedies, but how people have also stepped up to the intangible, consoling, grieving, praying. Consider how President Reagan talked about the lives lost when the Space Shuttle Challenger exploded, which so many Americans saw live on television.
We will never forget them, nor the last time we saw them this morning, as they prepared for their journey and waved goodbye and slipped the surly bonds of earth to touch the face of God.
Whatever people think of Reagan's ideology, it was an address America needed, comfort during tragedy. Many other leaders have stepped up to the horrific task of addressing a traumatized nation after all kinds of terrible, terrible things that you don't want to happen, including a period in our history where we had more than one assassination. Lyndon Johnson had a notoriously frosty relationship with the president he served, but he found the words to address a country that really seemed to stand still after the president was shot in broad daylight in a scene that would replay on air for years. Here it was, just days after John F. Kennedy was murdered.
Today, John Fitzgerald Kennedy lives on in the immortal words and works that he left behind. He lives on in the mind and memories of mankind. He lives on in the hearts of his countrymen.
He lives on. Many people could feel that. And that was obviously, historians tell us when we go back and read, it was a tough and violent time. It was just 5 years later that President Kennedy's brother, Robert F. Kennedy, was running for president himself when Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. And in that era, obviously a time without the internet or all the instant updates that are so normal today, it literally fell to Robert Kennedy to break the news to a crowd. And Kennedy offered his earnest, vulnerable feelings while also trying in that very moment to be a leader who could credibly, morally, ethically care and love.
Martin Luther King was shot and was killed tonight in Memphis. So I ask you tonight to return home, to say a prayer for the family of Martin Luther King. Yeah, it's true. But more importantly, to say a prayer for our own country, which all of us love. A prayer for understanding and that compassion that of which I spoke.
Each of those incidents involved the sudden death of prominent Americans, a contrast to where we're living now, a current grinding march of everyday Americans dying, few of them well known in the way of those individuals. But other presidents have confronted mass death tolls and also focused on addressing the countless, basically unknown but forever changed and impacted families. Here was President Clinton after the Oklahoma City terrorist bombing.
And to all the members of the families here present who have suffered loss, though we share your grief, your pain is unimaginable, and we know that. Those who are lost now belong to God. Someday we will be with them. But until that happens, their legacy must be our lives.
President Obama, who was known to avoid much public emotion, shared his own grief, choking up when speaking about another violent attack during his tenure, the mass shooting of first graders at Newtown.
First graders. and from every family who never imagined that their loved one would be taken from our lives by a bullet from a gun. Every time I think about those kids, it gets me mad.
And then there was September 11th. President Bush's foreign policy response, we all know, widely debated by Americans, the Republican Party leadership ultimately opposing the Iraq war that Bush said it must spawn. So we don't erase that part of the reaction. But history also shows there was wide agreement that President Bush stepped up to comfort the victims and work on leading the country during the tragedy towards attempted unity, immediately visiting a mosque to advocate tolerance and sharing grief with the whole nation.
We are here in the middle hour of our grief. To the children and parents and spouses and families and friends of the lost, we offer the deepest sympathy of the nation. And I assure you, you are not alone.
You probably remember those months, those years after 9/11. In many different ways, we all grieved and remembered the dead in local acts and national ceremonies, in the anniversaries and the ongoing charity events. And today's pandemic death toll is now 30 times the number of Americans we lost in 9/11. We haven't had enough time, anything like an actual amount of enough time to devote any of that level of attention proportionally we did to each of those losses. And this thing isn't even close to over. But when you listen to these past presidents from both parties, there is more than a history lesson here, more than just a reminder of the way things were. Just looking at this, when we were putting it together and now as you're watching it, I think it does something else. It unavoidably, obviously, provides a bipartisan contrast to how the current president approaches this part of the job during this mounting death toll. How do you console and grieve with a nation that sorely needs it? Well, President Trump largely avoids any words of public condolence at all. That's unprecedented in history. And it's all the more striking because Trump has been talking more in public than most presidents did about most of the tragedies we just showed you. Indeed, the numbers here are the factual context. They will eventually also become history. In a month of virus briefings, Donald Trump spoke for a total cumulative of 13 hours, discussing the virus and the government response, 2 hours attacking his critics, 45 minutes praising his administration, but just under 5 minutes total expressing any condolence for victims or grieving. That's according to a count by the Washington Post. Today, the U.S. death toll surges over 90,000. And President Trump is talking about never forgetting the dead, a sentiment that he still immediately mixed with blaming the, quote, people that caused the problem.
We can never forget all of the people that have been left behind, that have died for some reason that should have never happened. Should have never happened. You know that. I know that. And the people that caused the problem, they know that too. It's too bad.
It's too bad. They know that too. The sound you hear is the sound of the President of the United States darkly suggesting someone else did this and they know they have some guilty failure of awareness. That's while claiming to pay tribute to the dead. This is a total contrast to other presidents, to other past American leaders in both parties. And while this is not the only thing going on right now, if you do find yourself at home thinking, this is not normal, we should not act like this is normal, you're right. It's not. The archive shows that. And many of the moments you just saw were, of course, from different tragedies across time, with different nuances and all the caveats and all the different things that go when you make any comparison. But we checked because this is still the news as we look at history. And the facts show there's also a sharp contrast between how this president discusses this infectious disease and how the last situation like this to create a major scare, swine flu, how that played out. Here are how 2 consecutive presidents addressed the nation about deaths from these public health crises, where there is, of course, grief plus the obligation for elected government leaders to provide safety information.
Overnight, we also received confirmation that an infant in Texas has died as a result of this virus.
Unfortunately, 1 person passed away overnight. She was a wonderful woman, a medically high-risk patient in her late 50s.
My thoughts and prayers and deepest condolences go out to the family, as well as those who are ill and recovering from this flu.
Additional cases in the United States are likely, but healthy individuals should be able to fully recover.
This is obviously a serious situation, serious enough to take the utmost precautions.
So healthy people, if you're healthy, you will probably go through a process and you'll be fine.
That didn't prove to be true. Long after the public information put the president and his team on notice that it wouldn't be true, we've reported out the grim numbers every night. Each tragedy is different. Each president chooses how to address what happens on their watch. But each president also takes an oath to faithfully preserve and protect the nation through their constitutional leadership. In crisis, what presidents do or fail to do dictates how the nation is or is not protected. In a democracy, citizens can take stock of the results. You make up your own mind. In this polarized and traumatized time, we do look to history because it can add a larger context in how you make up your mind, whether it's looking at these decades-old pieces of information, of tragedy that may feel sometimes like a bygone era, or even recent history that may remind people you're not dreaming. It was not always this way. In fact, it was just 5 years ago when America faced a horrific time for grieving, the Charleston church shooting. And people cried together, and a president tried to do some small bit of justice to the memory of the people who just died.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me.
Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.